Can Godolphin finally get their elusive Kentucky Derby victory? Let's talk sovereignty on this Kentucky Derby Contenders Spotlight Series. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the Kentucky Derby Spotlight Series on NYRA Bets YouTube. Make sure to press that like button and subscribe to NYRA Bets today. Subscribing is entirely free of cost, just notifies you when new videos drop on the channel, such as race previews, full card analyses, handicapping and betting tutorials, weekly programs, as well as shows like this one. Listen, there's a lot of content that we have here, and we are your one-stop shop to get you ready for the Kentucky Derby, the Triple Crown, Saratoga, the Breeders' Cup, everything related to horse racing and handicapping. All right, well, let's dive into this Kentucky Derby Contender Spotlight Series and talk a little bit about Sovereignty, a horse that has had a lot of buzz for a long time, going back to last summer at Saratoga. This is a horse trained by Bill Mott, and one of the first times I ever heard about Sovereignty was actually in the mornings at Saratoga. I was walking around. I was bumped into my colleague, Darwin Vizcaya. Darwin's always very sharp handicapper, and he knows a lot of the jockeys really well. And he said, I was talking to Junior Alvarado, who is Bill Mott's #1 jockey and who ended up now riding Sovereignty. And he said Bill's got a very special 2-year-old named Sovereignty. You want to watch out for this horse. And indeed, Sovereignty has become a very special 2 and now 3-year-old. This is one who physically, he looks the part. When you talk to people around the game, they are all very high on this horse's chances. So let's dive in and learn a little bit more about Sovereignty. Like I said, trained by the Hall of Famer Bill Mott, jockeyed by Junior Alvarado. Now, it should be noted that Alvarado was not able to ride him in the Florida Derby because he had a fractured scapula. However, he came back from that effort. He came back from that injury. He has been riding the last couple of weeks. He will be riding him for the Kentucky Derby. Now, there are some questions about Sovereignty from a standpoint of pedigree. Into Mischief, he's a sire that elicits a lot of reactions from people. Generally speaking, I think Into Mischiefs are best going a mile to a mile and an eighth. I think that's kind of that's where they do their best. And they can sprint very well also. So you can see 6 furlong sprinters doing very well there. But in terms of the upper bound distance, generally a mile or a mile and an eighth. Now, you're going to have some people in the comments, inevitably, who will say, but he sired 2 Kentucky Derby winners. Indeed, he did. One of those was during the COVID year, and the other one was via disqualification. So there's a little bit of an asterisk next to both of those victories. Now, that said, what Sovereignty has going in his favor is, even though he's got a sire who I don't necessarily love going the classic mile and a quarter distance, he's got fantastic dam side pedigree. Crowned, his dam is by Bernardini. Bernardini has truly become one of, if not the best, broodmare sires. In other words, a great sire of future broodmares and future mothers and future dams, basically. And he always infuses a lot of distance into those broodmares in a lot of instances. So you have the classic distance influence underneath, and you have the Into Mischief speed a little bit up top, although Sovereignty is not a particularly quick horse by any stretch. But you have this kind of combination of speed and stamina, which is a great way to breed, obviously. Sovereignty has some very notable efforts. Won the Fountain of Youth, won the Street Sense, finished second in that Florida Derby last time out. I think actually the most important race that he ran is that Street Sense, even though it took place last year. And he is a horse that I can't wait to dive into these past performances a little bit more and show you a little bit more of what I'm looking at when I take a look at Sovereignty. And so let's do that now. This is a horse, like I said, bred and owned by Godolphin. Godolphin has been looking, and anybody who knows the sport knows, you remember those Godolphin blue silks, right? You see him winning a lot of races internationally. You see him winning a lot of races here in the United States. But they've never won the Kentucky Derby. And Mott is trying to fulfill that this year for them. Now, one of the things you'll see is it took him a little while to break his maiden, but he faced some really nice horses in those first few efforts. He faced horses like Tip Top Thomas and Key Waden and Rookie Card and even Prater. And none of those horses ended up wanting to go very long. But notice, those were races where 6 furlongs and a one-turn mile. That's where those horses that I just listed off are doing their best work, is at 6 furlongs and a one-turn mile. So he lost to horses that like going a little bit shorter. Then he goes in his third start as a maiden still to Churchill Downs. So he has run over the surface before. More importantly, he's not only run over the surface, he's done 2 turns. He did a mile and a 16th at Churchill Downs, and he dominated the street sense, winning that race and really stamping himself as a major contender for the following year. Here's one of the things to keep in mind. Every year we talk about productive races and races that you can point back to and go, wow, was that a race that had a lot of great talent in it that really portended some great efforts moving forward and really showcased some great future horses. The Street Sense is one of those races because, yes, your winner was Sovereignty, who went on to win the Fountain of Youth, finished second in the Florida Derby. Your second place horse was Tiztastic. That horse went on to win the Louisiana Derby. Your third place finisher was Sandman. That horse went on to win the Arkansas Derby. You are talking about having 3 of the top, depending on whose list you look at, 3 of the top 6, 7, 8 major Kentucky Derby contenders all coming out of the same race. That was an incredibly important race, and Sovereignty is the only horse to really possess a victory going 2 turns on the main track at Churchill Downs. So he is someone who has a little bit of an advantage over these other horses. You know he likes the surface. He can come from well off the pace as he did that day. And then in the Fountain of Youth, coming back from a little bit of a layoff, didn't run from late October until early March. And I'll be honest, I didn't think he was going to get there that day. River Thames was able to kind of get a pretty good trip that day, had the jump on him. Sovereignty going down the backstretch looked like he was kind of toiling a little bit. Junior was having to get after him. And all of a sudden, his ears pricked up around the turn. He turned for home, and they had a very short stretch. If you're familiar with Gulfstream Park, that's only a mile and a 16th route. And when you turn for home in those mile and 16th races, you don't have a lot of time to make up ground. He managed to fly down that short stretch and make up ground and nab River Thames at the wire, earned a 95 Beyer speed figure, which is his career best at this point. Then he came back in the Florida Derby. He broke from post position 10, which is a tough spot, and he had Manny Franco on. And Manny is a really nice rider and somebody who rides a lot of Godolphin horses and who I get to see up close and personal up here in New York. And Manny's a very, very good jockey. But I always think it is challenging to take over jockeying a closer more so than a speed horse. If you're taking over a speed horse, you know what to do. Just go to the front. Let the horse carry you the rest of the way. And yes, you have to have an internal clock to make sure your fractions aren't getting too out of control. But by and large, it's pretty straightforward. Go to the front, see how far the horse takes you. When you're riding a closer the way that Manny was, you've never been under that horse before. You've never been on top of that horse before. You don't know what you have under you. And you don't know when do you have to push the button? When do you have to get this horse moving? And it just felt like he got moving a little late that day. He was making up ground on Tapan Street, who was the winner. I think if that race had gone a mile and a quarter, he would have easily won that race and gotten past Tapan Street. So it wasn't a bad effort. He finished second ultimately and was, like I said, making up ground at every point in the call. But still, it does beg some questions. Only earned a 92 Beyer speed figure for that effort. I also wonder if he was really fully cranked for that effort because he had already qualified for the Kentucky Derby based upon his victory in the Fountain of Youth. So it's possible Bill Mott didn't have the screws all the way tightened for that race. This will now be his third race back in the form cycle for 2025, which is, I think, very critical to note. The Florida Derby has long been one of the more effective prep races when you look at the Kentucky Derby calendar and the history of Kentucky Derby winners. You get Junior Alvarado back aboard. And the key for Sovereignty is he should appreciate the distance, but his running style will require that there is a fair amount of speed in this race. And I think when you look at the pace dynamics of this race, and you look at horses like Rodriguez and American Promise and East Avenue and Owen Almighty and maybe Neo Equos, and maybe Admire Daytona or one of the international runners, there should be a sufficient amount of speed. And it's hard to sustain that speed going a mile and a quarter. And so in recent years, we've seen horses coming from well off the pace to win the Kentucky Derby. Sovereignty certainly fits that mold. The key is the trip. And, he's faced some larger fields. He beat a 9-horse field. He finished second in that 10-horse field. It's notable that Fountain of Youth effort was only 6 horses. So, again, he's going to be facing a much bigger field than he's faced in the past. But as long as he draws well and Junior gets him away okay, he'll probably be sitting towards the back of the field, 15th, 16th, probably around there. And again, needs to make the move and potentially try to avoid going wide. That's always kind of been an issue in the Kentucky Derby. If you try to keep a horse clean coming from the back, you're going to probably have to go wide. What did we see last year with that ride that Brian Hernandez Jr. gave to Mystic Dan? He saved every single inch of ground across the two turns. He traveled the least amount of distance of all 20 horses in the race. That sometimes is the key to victory. So Sovereignty, listen, depending on where he's caught, depending on where he is, does Junior have the audacity to just try to find that inside trip the way Rich Strike did a few years ago, the way Mystic Dan did last year, or does he try to swing wide like what we saw Sierra Leone and Forever Young do last year? And they, of course, came up just a nose short. So listen, Sovereignty's he's a very good horse. He's a horse I like a lot. And he's a horse that has a ton of talent. He needs to get a little bit faster probably to win this race from a buyer speed figure standpoint, but I don't think there's any issue that he can move forward. The key with him is the trip, as it will be for a lot of these horses, and whether or not he can navigate the trip coming from the back. He's going to be further back than a horse like Journalism. He's going to be toward the back of the field. He'll be with horses like a Tistastic and like a Final Gambit and like some of these horses that are more deep closers. And that's kind of what Sovereignty is. But again, he should appreciate the distance. He has the right running style if it gets fast up front. The key is whether Junior is able to give him the sort of ride that he needs on the inside or if he comes flying on the outside. And by the way, we should say Junior's won some big races with some deep closers. Remember when he won that Saudi Cup just a couple of years ago with Senior Buscador coming flying late from the back of the field. So he can absolutely do this in a big spot, just a matter of whether he can do it in the Kentucky Derby. All right, folks. Well, thanks for tuning in to this episode of the NYRA Bets Kentucky Derby Contender Spotlight Series. Hope you enjoyed it, learned a little bit more about Sovereignty, feel better about maybe placing a bet on this horse. I would imagine he will be second or third choice, depending on how things play out. That is where I would imagine he will fall leading up to post time in the Kentucky Derby. There's a lot of buzz about this horse. But like I said, horses like Sandman, maybe Tapan Street, maybe one of the Bafferts, maybe ends up getting a little bit more love. So we'll see. But this is a horse that could be phenomenal value if he's in that 6-1, 8-1, 10-1 range. So definitely something to keep in mind when betting on the Derby. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. My name is Matthew DeSantis, wishing you a great and profitable day at the races. And reminding you, friends, it's now post time.